Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Crubcast. It is July 18th, 2023 at the time of recording this, but you might be seeing it later because we post them later. Today we're going to be talking about, I don't know, but I'm going to talk about how I'm doing today before I pass it off to someone else. I am kind of tired. No, I'm looking forward to this. This is my first time as the technical host of this stream, and I hope to make it an absolute torture fest for everyone else. Em, how are you doing?
Every day's a holiday. How are you, Trav?
Kind of tired.
Very good. Very good. I'm doing wonderful. I've had a wonderful week. Thank you very much. How about you, Kevin?
I'm doing pretty okay. I'm also very tired. But that won't stop today from being a good time. Just afterwards, Trav and I will both die. Good.
Yeah. Sean will stop it from being a good time. Sean!
Hi, Sean.
Hi, that's me. Hi, I'm Sean, and I'm actually the host for today, despite speaking last, because everyone hates me.
Host goes last.
Okay.
That's just courtesy.
That's
it's like
the
last person to the Airbnb gets the fridge.
It's also not the rule. But,
That's
hi,
not true
Sean.
at all.
What are we talking
Hello.
about today, and how are you?
So today we're going to be talking about remakes and reboots, and also I'm doing quite all right. So this is my second time hosting. The last time I hosted, I want you all to know that I didn't sleep at all. And this time I did sleep, but I woke up to my dog trying to dig a hole in my bed because someone on July 18th was still shooting off fireworks at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I work overnight, so that's why I'm still asleep. So they're still shooting off fireworks, and my dog doesn't like that. So now I have a hole in my sheet, so that's a great way to wake up. But
actually dug through it, like not even in a cute way.
Oh yeah, no,
just like bapping at it.
No, she was like, I need to get in there. So little upset about that. But like I said, I'm awake now. But
Okay.
On that note, we are talking about remakes, reboots, and not remasters, reshoots. So I wanted to bring up this because I feel like there's been a lot of reboots and remakes lately. Especially ones that I've been touching on lately, just in my own personal backlog, because I'm like, oh, this remake is coming out. I'm just gonna wait for that. So just jumping into it, Trav, since you are the technical person and just I want to pick on you, what is one of your, let's go with favorite remakes, I guess?
Favorite remakes? Well, okay.
Favorite remake or reboot? Or remaster?
Reboot, yeah.
Not
remaster.
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 Yeah, because I'm really... how far are we into the stream? Can I swear?
Sure.
I'm really fucking anal about the vocabulary about this. Like, it's okay.
Same.
Like,
well,
it's
not
like,
anymore, actually.
all right, well, here's this thing, and then people are like, oh man, we're getting a System Shock remaster when they're talking about the remake. It's like, that's a remake.
Oh yeah.
That's not a remaster. All right, so anyway, favorite, I guess, reboot, whatever.
Yeah, let's focus on
whatever.
reboots and remakes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say Doom, but that's more of a sequel. That's just using the title of the original. It's arguable that it's a reboot.
No, I think that's a fair shout because mine's going to be similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Doom's
I
a good
think
one.
just by sheer like favorite game that I'm going to talk about, probably Doom, 2016. But if we're going more strictly remakes / reboots, I'd probably say, as of recently, System Shock, just because it's outstanding. Otherwise, probably something like Metroid Zero Mission or Metroid Prime Remaster. Sorry, I just listed 4 when you asked for 1. But
It's okay, I can't count.
I have a lot of options here, and I'm having a hard time picking. So while you pick up whatever you just dropped, I can list some more if
It's
you
fine.
want.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
I want you to tell me, like,
all right, welcome fellas to the System
God.
Shock rambling stream. No,
yeah, I want you to actually, like, so what exactly makes it a reboot, though?
a reboot.
What's your definition of a reboot in the sense of like a Doom 2016, and what does that qualify for you?
I see Doom 2016 as a mechanical reboot,
a soft reboot.
Mm-hmm.
where it's still continuing a story, so it's not a reboot in that it's a new series in that regard, even though it kind of is. But it's bringing back the game design philosophy that's been missing for 20 plus years. That's how I see it in Doom's case. Otherwise, I usually see a reboot as taking the branding, ignoring the everything about it before, and making something new. This is a weird example that comes to mind. My mind comes to the Xbox 360 Turok game.
Oh yeah, that's a good choice.
Yeah.
I don't know why that, like, I've never even freaking played it. Don't know why that came to mind.
Kevin, you said that you had like a similar thing to what Trav was saying.
Yeah, so I feel like people would know that we would both default to these when in doubt, but also mine relates because there are a couple reboots in the Ratchet franchise, debatably, including one that is just Doom Eternal for kids, which at the time of publish, that game comes out on PC yesterday.
Time out. You can't just say Doom Eternal for kids and not explain that.
Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is Doom Eternal for kids. It is.
How?
In terms of
in terms of mechanical flow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Kevin's not the only person I've heard say that. Like I've heard multiple.
Yeah, that's
the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, I heard it enough that I was like, you know what? That's actually pretty accurate from the bits I've played of Doom Eternal, because I haven't sat down with Doom Eternal fully yet, just because I would rather go through them in order, and I've never been a huge Doom guy.
Really?
Pardon the pun. But anyway, as far as reboots and remakes and the evolution of media goes, Ratchet's one of those in the gaming space that gets a lot of flack for the changes it's made over the years, because it continued evolving and attempting to at first grow up with its audience. So the PS2 games everyone loved. The PS3 games were meant to take those kids that were like 7 to 8 years old when the first game came out, and now they're a little older, so they wanted to make a deeper story, a more involved media piece, cinematic experience. And while some players liked that, a lot of players went to the 360, and so they just didn't come back. And then it came time, after diminishing returns because they made 45 games in 3 years, we got to the point where Ratchet was one of the biggest, most Mario-esque franchises that Sony had. So they wanted to make a movie out of it and start their movie line that failed, and then they brought it back again, and now it's doing better. Marginally, at least. Anyway, they wanted to also introduce Ratchet to a newer audience, because now the people that were, 7 years old when the first game came out were potentially having kids at that point. And so they made a movie, as everyone who knows Ratchet and Clank knows, they made a bad movie, and they made a video game that was a game based on the movie, based on the game, that was not ever intended to be a reboot, as much as people want to think that it was. It was just a one-off because they really wanted to make the first game again. Anyway, the point of what I'm saying is that Ratchet went through a very notable reboot cycle, in that it got a lot of flack for it, and people just assumed that it was one of those where, they don't know what they're doing anymore, they're just cashing out. And they had to make another reboot, essentially, to come off of that reboot, and that was Rift Apart. Because by the time the PS5 came out, that's another new console where now you have to appeal to the PlayStation 2 audience, that the fans that loved the early games, the PlayStation 3 audience, which may not be the same audience as the first one, although there's crossover, the audience that started with the PS4 game, and the audience that is 7 years old that has never played a Ratchet and Clank game before. They ran into the Sonic problem, where when a franchise runs for too long, you start to splinter because you try to grow up with the audience, and you eventually have to do a soft reboot of some sort. Reboots are kind of necessary for a long-running media franchise, unless it's Mario, where you just everything's a reboot. Yeah. And I think Ratchet's a very interesting example, because it took until the reboot for them to do anything fucking new with the franchise. And that's part of why I like Rift Apart so much, is that it was the first time in such a long time that they actually changed the mechanics a little by making it Doom Eternal for kids. And I think... I guess I think it's interesting to look at the idea of reboots and remakes and what we consider them, not in terms of game design, but in terms of perception, and in terms of what the audience sees, what the companies that are making these see. Because I think there's a lot of immediate flack that goes towards any remake or reboot simply because it's a remake or reboot, and I don't think that's quite fair. But we'll come probably back to that as this discussion goes forward.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. Em, what about you?
Boy, you picked a good one. So,
All right, I'm ready.
first we have to decide what we're going to define these things as, right? Reboot, remaster, adaptation, remake, director's cut, extended edition, right? What exactly means what? Is the GTA trilogy, right? That's a remaster, but is it really? Is it, what amount of original code needs to be there to make it a remaster versus a reboot? At what point are we calling it these things? What's an adaptation? What's just a sequel? What's, whatever, a reimagining? And all these terms kind of fall into the same thing as, like, what's the difference between a roguelike and a roguelite? It becomes very academic to discuss it. And so I kind of tend to avoid defining it too much, right? And instead I say whether or not something is an adaptation or whether or not it's reboot, remaster, reimagine, remake, right? All those things just kind of get, all the R words are the same word in this context. And then adaptation. And boy, there's some good and there's some bad out there, right? And I think adaptation is interesting because people don't really understand adaptations. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of why I say that, right?
All right.
Which is that when you're adapting something, the entire idea is that you're adapting it to a new media form. You're taking a book and adapting it into a movie. You're taking a video game and adapting it into a TV show. And when you're doing that, adaptation by necessity and by definition means changing it to fit the media. So, for example, Foundation, which is a TV show that's on Apple, and it was a book that was written by a book series written by Isaac Asimov. The adaptation on Apple TV or whatever the hell it's called is a very good adaptation, but it's not super good media. It was a very good adaptation. There is and there's some very, 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 very mild spoilers here, but they're only spoilers if you read the book. So I don't know that they count as spoilers. There is an emperor in the book, and there's an emperor in the TV show. And in the book, it is a series of different emperors, and they live and they die, right, over time. They live and they die. And in the TV show, you can't really do that, right? You can't just be like, here's an old guy. Who is he? Like, there's too much explanation. So instead, what they do is they create this concept of cloning, and they have this emperor who is constantly being shown, and you understand that every time you see him, that is the emperor. And it doesn't matter what time period we're in, because he's a clone. And so, therefore, he is always the emperor. He might be clone 52, or he might be clone 2, or he might be clone 500. Doesn't matter. He is the emperor. So that's an example of good adaptation, where they're getting across the story, right, without baggage of every time they show this man who's important to the story, saying, this is actually Emperor blah, 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 and he's, the son of this guy. You don't have to know that. And I think that's a good example. Whereas The Shining is a terrible adaptation. This is a horrendous adaptation, but it's really good movie.
Oh yeah, The Shining is probably my favorite horror movie of all time, if I'm being honest. But it does not. It is not adapted well.
No, and Stephen King hates it. He hated it, and it's arguably his best film adaptation. But like, what a terrible adaptation of the source, right? Like, it doesn't work very well as an adaptation directly of the book. It tells a whole different story. The Last of Us TV show might be an example that is good. It's a good adaptation and a good piece of media.
And even then, it got flack from certain consumers because they felt
they made changes.
They made changes, or they didn't make enough changes, which is one of the big things, is that as we've entered the gaming space of remakes and whatnot, and as media has become part of people's personalities, you're not allowed to make changes, whether it's making Spyro slightly more purple, or or whether it's making the backgrounds of Spyro slightly more purple. And I think is the purpler a word? Sidebar. I want purpler to be a word.
It is today.
Okay, purpler is a word. You know it now. Dictionary.com. We got you. Anyway, I just wanted to jump in and say, like,
purplier.
With The Last of Us, it's interesting because there were some people that felt this isn't really about Joel and Ellie as much in the show version as it is in the game version. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that
it's really, really well done.
It's both complementary, but also it's an anthology in a way.
There are changes that they make, and I don't want to get into like spoiler cast of Toulouse, but like there are changes that they make to that that I disagree with, but I understand why they made the changes. I think that some of them are more successful than others, right? Specifically, the earlier scenes with some of the characters and how they leave. Yeah. I didn't think that was particularly successful for me. I felt that harmed the character, but these things, adaptations require change. They require
absolutely.
They don't always succeed. Super Mario Brothers, the movie, Alone in the Dark, the movie, The Last Airbender. Right? Like these are all really bad adaptations that are also bad media. Video game wise, you've got Colonial Marines. Do you remember 2014's Rambo? That's a bad adaptation.
Or the Bionic Commando gritty reboot on 360, similar to the one.
Maybe most famously would be like E.T. from 1982. Right? These are bad games that are bad adaptations as well. So I think that's a more I don't want to say lucid argument, but it's more understandable, I think, to talk about adaptation versus reboot, remaster, reimagining, blah, 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 right? Versus that. Because once we get into what's a reboot versus remaster, we always have to start with the discussion of what is the definition, and that sucks.
Yeah.
And then you have to talk about things like GTA Trilogy versus Warcraft 3. They're both bad, right? The reimagining, reboot, whatever, they're both bad. Does that mean that reboots or remasters or whatever are bad? Well, what about RE2, which is a reimagining in the most successful way, or Final Fantasy VII Remaster?
I was going to come around to that one. Yep.
Right, or Hitman, the most These are adaptations, they're reboots, they're remasters, whatever, that were very successful versus ones that are very, very bad. And I don't think that you can have a comprehensive discussion about them while you're trying to define reboot, remaster, reimagining, remake, all of that.
And let me jump. Oh no, you go, Sean.
Because, for example, I've seen a lot of people say that Blade Runner 2049 is a reboot of Blade Runner, but then you have other people that complain that not complain, but insist that it's a sequel. And then you're pretty much it feels like you're just splitting hairs at that point. For me personally, I've grown up loving metal, so I used to be one of those metal snobs that was it's not death metal, it's black metal. You go into the super subgenres.
I was one of those too.
And it's kind of interesting to see how this has kind of devolved into that as well. So I try to keep myself out of that, to keep an open mind, because it's not as black and white as that. But it's really interesting to see what people consider a reboot.
Well, to jump into that, because I think there's some interesting. Sorry. There's some interesting stuff there, because Blade Runner is a really interesting example where it is clearly
it is a sequel.
It's a sequel. Clearly a sequel.
It's meant to stand alone, but it's a sequel.
It's a standalone sequel, and so
but
that's an interesting one. If we're getting a
sequel 20 up years later,
50 in that case,
is it 20 is generous. Is it fair to say that it can't be both, or that it can be both?
No, that's what we're saying. I think.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that discussion kind of falls
flat. Hypothetical. Can it be?
Yeah.
Can something be both a sequel and a reboot? When we talked about Doom earlier, that's an obvious example. But with movies, that's the conversation's a little bit different.
Well, and so that's what I wanted to jump into a little bit before, Sean. We have to get to you as far as one of the adaptations. I'm going to go with adaptations from here on, because I think that's the easier way to discuss. I think Em's right. Especially because what I was going to say was the important thing with adaptations that we also always neglect is that an adaptation is not necessarily, obviously, the same person or the same team. And even if it is, perspectives change. The message of a story can change over time. And one of the best examples of that in the gaming space is a Resident Evil 2 remake, where compared to RE4, where it's essentially a one-to-one remake with a couple small changes, RE2 is a functional remake that still lives in the spirit of the original, and only the most miserable people on earth are going to say, no, it's a bad remake. No, you're just wrong.
Yeah.
And then the other one, which came out right around the same time, is Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is a game that is a remake, it's a sequel, it's a commentary on the idea of a remake and an adaptation, and the audience fan canonization or the fanonization of everything that they love, because people hold these things so near and dear to their heart that they say, yeah, I want a faithful remake to Final Fantasy VII. Well, good news. It's on Switch. It's on Steam. It's on PS5. They already did it. That's a remaster, sure. But if you want a faithful remake, you're not getting anything better than that. If you want a faithful remake that has different gameplay, it's not a faithful remake. You can say in spirit of the story it is, but the thing about Final Fantasy VII that made it so impactful, that made it one of the most remembered, one of the most highlighted games in history, that made it a piece of art that will be remembered in the same league as some of the better books and movies and shows out there, is the fact that it was able to do something that no other game had, and that was genuinely shock you by way of things like Aerith, for example.
Fire materia. Oh.
And
that too.
You can't do Final Fantasy VII Remake when everybody knows Aerith, when everybody knows Darth Vader. You can't do that shock again. But with the way that Final Fantasy VII Remake does things, and I'm not going to spoil any of that game story or any of where that plot might go, it also might be a train wreck by the end. It probably will be. I'm hoping it's not. They made sure that they can give you an Aerith moment. In fact, they kind of did a couple times in the first game, where they did shock you on that same level, because they want you to be a part of the story. You can't tell the story of Final Fantasy without telling the story of the audience that fell in love with it and how impactful that game was on the industry. You know?
Oh, yeah. And I'm kind of lucking out with this because I never played Final Fantasy VII, so like I don't really know much about it outside of the whole, Aerith thing. So my first...
Which is arguably the most famous spoiler of all time.
It is the Darth Vader.
Yes.
It is the Darth Vader of video games.
Yes. And so my first experience with Final Fantasy VII has been Final Fantasy Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake. And let me tell you, I freaking love that game. And because, like, this is my first time experiencing that story, these characters, and I really know, like, dick about them, I just want to stick to, like, this possible trilogy that's coming out just to see what happens, because I'm experiencing something that I don't think many people are able to do, because I know so many like fans have played through Final Fantasy VII probably numerous times, whereas I didn't get to experience that. So this remake is really my one true experience with the franchise.
And let me jump very briefly onto one thing I want to throw out there. It's not an adaptation, it's not a remake, it's not anything like that, but I think it's important in the scope of Final Fantasy, and that's Final Fantasy 16. Because that game's getting a lot of flack for being not an RPG, or it not being the Final Fantasy that people want because it's too dark. And I think that misses the point of what Final Fantasy has always been thematically. I think that 16, again, to not say anything spoilery, calls back so frequently to the themes and the story beats and everything about the prior games that it's very clearly made with a lot of love. And I've been really enjoying my time with it, because even as a more casual Final Fantasy enjoyer, I've played enough of the games at this point. I can see all those moments, and I can see like what they're trying to do and calling back and having their own spin on things like eco-terrorism. The plot of Final Fantasy VII. Like, they're referencing stuff like that. They're referencing the failure or the inevitability of fate and whether you can stop fate. All this stuff. And I think that in the scope of a wide-running series of games that's always changed from game to game, I think it's interesting that, again, the way that fans hold things so near and dear to their heart that anything that they don't necessarily love is an affront to their personality. I think that kind of... limits the capabilities of an adaptation, because most of the great movies we saw in the 90s and many of the great movies we've seen in the 90s, the 2000s, the 80s even, there were a lot of remakes of movies that you wouldn't have heard of if you grew up in those eras. And like, there are so many, like, Mission Impossible is an adaptation, and now it's an adaptation of an adaptation. Like, I think it goes even deeper than that, but anyway, it's people think it's a newer thing, and it's just not. And I think that it's just, we take things more seriously now and more personally now.
Oh, for sure. Especially if you like grew up on it.
Yeah.
Like that. Like for example, I guess we'll jump into some stuff that I've done. Well, watch. So
what have you done, Sean?
I've done too much. But for example, like I love Ninja Gaiden on the NES.
You poor thing.
And yeah, I know. Because I was just like, it's a hard game, I could do this. Wasn't able to do it. Never beat the game. And seeing whenever they came out with, I think it was on the Xbox or Xbox 360, the 2004 Ninja Gaiden reboot.
Yeah.
At the time, like I was like, I don't know how old I was.
What the hell is this?
I was like, this isn't Ninja Gaiden, and I was like so upset about that. And it was kind of like, in that moment, I kind of, even at a young age, I was like, this is kind of dumb for me to be mad about, because this is like pretty much a reboot of the game and the series, and I just have to get used to this whole 3D space. And from that moment on, I started to appreciate all forms of media more like that. Like, for example, I love X-Men. It's cheesy, especially the movies. But when they tried to do that reboot with X-Men First Class, I was so hyped. I was so ready for everything. I was so excited. And again, that's one of those, like, is it a reboot? Is it a sequel? Shut up. It's a fun time. Well, it was kind of a fun time, and then it went very downhill.
Oh,
but
and then
like,
Dark Phoenix happened.
We don't talk about that.
Which one was the
I'm so
second
upset
one?
about
Was
that.
that Apocalypse?
Yes, Apocalypse. It went
I fell
First Class
asleep
and Apocalypse.
in the theater during Apocalypse. I was in the front row.
Apocalypse. Sorry, I'll let you finish your thought.
No, I'm not an X-Men fan, but I went to see it with somebody because they were like, "Oh, let's see a movie," and so we went and saw X-Men Apocalypse. I was in the front row because it was packed. I think it was opening weekend, and during the action scenes, I fell asleep. That movie sucks.
Yeah.
Trav, what were you guys saying?
X-Men Apocalypse was one of the first comic book movies that I saw that made me actively go, I want my money back.
Yeah.
Because I'm a comic book shill. I like the bad ones, arguably. Well, no, I thought Flash was pretty bad.
Good.
I thought She-Hulk was fine. And I thought X-Men Apocalypse was an affront to God because it was just so bad.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a little bit biased. Apocalypse is one of my favorite X-Men villains, and I thought that they did him really poorly.
Oh yeah, it was bad.
And just such a waste of Oscar Isaac's talent.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree with that.
I mean, we got him as, like, I don't know,
Everything
Spider-Man
else.
2099 in the new Spider-Verse, so that was fine.
Yeah. But I mean, that's another one of those reboots. I'll just talk about a couple reboots, not really go into them too much. Like, I love the new Evil Dead that they made. Well, newer Evil Dead, the reboot that they did with that. I really like, and this one might be a little bit of a hot take, I really like the new Sabrina the Teenage Witch that they did on Netflix.
I've heard good things about it.
Oh, I watched that at one point, like in pieces.
I watched, like, it starts off really good. I won't go into spoilers, but like, I really liked it. And obviously you can talk about God of War, which is one of my favorite.
Well, and to
games
jump
of
back
all
to
time.
Sabrina was a comic, I'm pretty sure, at first, too.
Yes.
Like, it was a comic, and no one would know that. So people that got upset about the idea of how dare you change my favorite Disney show or whatever.
Yeah.
Was it Disney? Was it ABC? It's either way, it's Disney. But anyway,
I think it was Disney.
like you get so upset about the version that you found, but you know, the Star Wars prequels are Star Wars to some people, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, it is what it is. Star Wars is not something that's just for you, and
Yeah.
none of this is just for you. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah.
Sabrina's actually a pretty interesting one there too, because
Don't
it's,
carry on.
you know, well, we've got the classic Archie comics, right?
Yeah.
Which then gets turned into a kind of a funky, lighthearted TV show with the Melissa Joan Hart, you know, Clarissa Explains It All kind of thing, right? And then that becomes kind of the definitive version of Sabrina for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And then they throw that out, and we see this. We see where they throw out the original adaptation and they adapt it differently, and that's, I don't know. I think that what is the definitive version of a piece of software, or not software, a piece of media is very interesting. You know,
Yeah.
Would most people agree that The Godfather, you know, Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather, is the definitive masterpiece performance version of it, or are they going to say, oh, Mario Puzo's novel, the Shawshank Redemption, right? Like, is that the definitive version? I would say, yeah, that's the definitive version. They made a better film than he made a movie.
Book more so than the book made the movie. I mean,
right?
In a sense, obviously, one exists because of the other, but you know,
Right.
Shawshank doesn't exist in as much of the cultural zeitgeist today as just a book.
Yeah,
Right.
You know, Fight Club, right? Are we really going to say that Paul Nook's novel, which, cult classic, whatever, right?
Is it better than the movie?
Is that nearly as definitive as David Fincher's film adaptation?
Everyone thinks of Edward Norton.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And that becomes one of the most iconic performances.
Is his name Edward? That doesn't feel right.
Ed Norton, yeah.
Yeah, no, you got it.
And boy, the visuals, the themes, the iconic performances, it just really goes. It's the go-to way to experience that story, right? That's how you experience that story.
You brought up I actually have a question now. So, like, Lord of the Rings, the trilogy movie, would you consider that to be the, I guess, definitive? Or would you...
right, like, is it definitive? Yeah. Is a question. So is The Hobbit,
because that is
the three films of The Hobbit, is that better than reading the 200-page short novel? It's a different story. They're telling a different story.
Yeah,
I think the Golem game is a great adaptation.
You shut your mouth right now, or I will come over there and set you on fire.
Wheel of Time's a really fascinating one because, like, Wheel of Time, or not Wheel of Time. I'm sorry, Lord of Rings is a really fascinating one because the Lord of the Rings has so much media out there, right? You've got the Ring of Power, which is a terrible adaptation.
I have many words
and
about that.
Not really great media, but then you've also got the Hobbit movies, which arguably are terrible. Actually, most of it's kind of a bad. But then you've got some really good games out there that take advantage of kind of the world there. Shadows of War, the Two Towers adventure game was pretty good. There's a lot of stuff in that universe where, like, there's good and there's bad and whatever. So I don't know. Lord of the Rings is a really fascinating one, but I think it sort of, what's the best way to watch it? What's the best way to experience the story? I don't know, man. Like, I think the story's too big. With that particular piece of property, right? Like, it's too big. How do you experience The Witcher is a lot easier, right? Yeah, because it's a smaller piece of media. How do you experience the Batman world, right? Do you read the comics? Do you watch the movies? Do you play the games? It's a harder
and they're all so wildly different because the tone of Batman has shifted so much over the years as people have taken their own inspiration.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Like, are you going to say that Batman Arkham as a series represents who Batman is? Or do you say that the Dark Knight series, the trilogy, that's who Batman is?
There are people that say that the Snyder take of Batman is the definitive version. And if we have people believing that, I mean, like, we're just going to be running in circles.
Right, exactly.
I'm repulsed by that version in some regard.
Let me jump in real quick, because I want to say that, like, one of the things that I want to highlight that I think we all believe is that your individual belief or fandom or support for a particular piece, if you feel that X is the definitive version of a series, you're more than entitled to that opinion. The problem that I was pointing out earlier is when people will refuse to engage with anything else beyond that and get, again, personally attacked by something changing beyond their specific tastes. Because like Pokemon is an example I've used on the podcast before, where I stopped playing Pokemon a few times throughout my life because I grew up out of it. And then the cool thing about it is I didn't get personally upset by, the dumb Sword and Shield Dexit stuff, because I was like, oh, I don't like that too much. Whatever, I'm just not going to buy them. I didn't seethe over it for months and years. So when objectively worse games, I don't use the word objectively often, but when Scarlet and Violet, objectively worse games, those games are dog shit in most metrics. When those came out, I bought one and I liked it a lot, as bad as it is. I'm part of the problem, don't get me wrong, but I enjoyed that game, and it's because I didn't let myself get so attached to my lost childhood that I'm seeking to grab again that I would never dare try the games again, or that they'll never hold up, because nothing will ever hold up to your memory. That's the point of a Final Fantasy VII Remake, is that your memory is flawed, Now,
before we go too deep into that, because I think there is a risk here of sounding a little bit elitist, right? And also to be a little bit dismissive of people's concerns about why reboots, and you say, I think reboots are necessary, right? Like, there's some value in kind of looking at why they're not and why people get upset. And I think maybe the number one reason is creative stagnation, right? The idea that you're looking at this thing and you are... So... I'm sorry, Trav. The MCU-ification, right? Where
I was waiting to bring that up.
Where it's understandable why fans don't like it. right? Where it feels like this new piece of media is alienating the fans who invested time or money or emotional attachment, and they have now been served a reboot that seemingly disregards that loyalty and diminishes in their mind the original's value, right? It can feel like this adaptation, this reboot, is simply exploring already plumbed depths. It's retreading familiar ground, and instead of focusing on expanding that existing universe and introducing more and exploring untapped avenues of storytelling, the reboot is now erasing that continuity. So I do understand why some people look at something and they go, this reboot sucks because this is now what this thing is.
Sure,
right. I can absolutely understand that,
and I'm not putting that aside. I think in the case of something like the MCUification, as you put it, also MCUification sounds like we're saying fuck partway through that. I just want to say that because that's
I'm
great.
okay with that.
No, I'm cool with it. You know, we're not going to censor it because we don't care. But I think one of the things in that case is that because of the growth and in popularity of something like thanks to the MCU, of general Marvel and Marvel Comics, yes, the general consensus of something has changed, but it's sometimes gatekeepy to say this is worse now because it's not catering to me. In the case of a Marvel specifically, because the Marvel comics still exist as much as they get rebooted, which is another problem, because they themselves as comics get rebooted all the time. There are still the same comic writers and new comic writers taking inspiration and creating their own adaptations of these same characters. So the other option still exists. You're not stuck with nothing. And so that's why I say to some extent, that reboots are necessary. That was more regarding games, I would say, because games, the mechanics will inevitably change as things evolve. You know, we're not at the point yet where an adaptation won't just be, but will just be the same game every time, because
Our
Final
standards
Fantasy
for what makes a good game.
Exactly. And so does the tone of our gaming culture as gaming has gotten more popular. And I think that's what I'm saying is important to recognize, because an example I was going to use is Enslaved Odyssey to the West is just another example of that Journey to the West. It's just another retelling of that same like classic story. I mean, hell, if we go deep, most mythologies are just taking shit and rebooting it. You know, the entire Roman mythology is a reboot. It is.
Yeah. And there's a lot, even in Norse mythology, a lot of stuff is kind of up for interpretation and adaptation, which is something I also think that, again, to go back into God of War a little bit, I think God of War uses to its advantage because it adapts, Norse mythology very well to a point where things make sense in that world. And also it does reboot the character of Kratos and what have you. But again, that goes into, just reboots and what have you. How do I want to say this?
While you're thinking, I do want to toss out that someone in chat mentioned the same thing about having to appeal with the 5 different demographics. And I want to mention this because for those that don't know, we stream these live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. currently on twitch.tv/Crub_official. We'll move to YouTube soon enough. If you didn't know, this is also on YouTube. If you want it in podcast form, it's also available in podcast form on every audio platform. If you go to crub.org, it'll take you right there. And we have a bunch of exclusive pre- and post-show stuff here on the stream that you can only catch live, or if you are a member of the Patreon, where you get exclusive bonus content from us, a bunch of fun things we've been putting together over time, and you get to ask us the patron question of the week, which will be starting very soon. Do
you want to know my most fantastic thing about the Patreon is right now?
Sure. We
have the founder role.
What's the founder role?
Well, what it means is that you get everything. If you subscribe to the Patreon now as a founder, right, you're only going to pay $5 a month. But you're going to get everything that we're going to put in a much higher tier included in that founder role. So really, it's kind of like a discount forever.
Did you say $5 a month?
$5 a month.
$5 a month.
That's incredible.
$5. But while you've continued thinking of your thing, Sean, the one thing I want to add and close out my thought on wider appeal of things as they get rebooted is that if you don't do those things, then the piece of media inevitably dies, and that's also fine. Like, there's a point at which there's too much of a diminishing return, where if you keep appealing to the same core audience, it's no longer as much as art is art. Art is also something you have to profit from, usually, if you want to live. So eventually there's a point at which, oh, hey, sorry, we're not going to make that anymore, because as much as we want to, there's not, if we do that, we close down, and then you get nothing anyway. So that's another reason that, again, I'm saying I think reboots are a necessary. It's the rock cycle where, you know, there's a hole in the crust. There's a fault line where things get absorbed and they come out slightly different. And there's just that. I'm saying that very poorly. I haven't taken geology class in 10 years.
I thought you were talking about the music genre.
No. But everything's on a cycle, no matter what you do, and similar to how our crust continues to cycle and evolve as it.
Please don't talk about my crust.
Why not?
If you subscribe to the founder tier on patreon.com/Crub, Trav will share his crust with you.
Look at my cat.
Lady in the Tramp style. That cat does not look happy with what you just did.
Wait, hold on. How is he going to share it?
For those in the audio realm, Trav's holding a very cute cat, and she is very much like, please let me down. I will kick you. Yeah,
she's against this.
Yeah. Sean, I've given you time to think of how you wanted to say what you were going to say.
Say something into the microphone.
Well, we have a cat that's apparently trying to speak. Yeah, there it is.
There we go.
This cat is not having it.
Yeah,
Bye.
she's not like that.
I'm going to steal that cat. It's okay, Trav doesn't know. So, anyway. So my thought went to the wayside. I have no idea what it was. But I did start to think of, like, you know, we were talking about, having to come up with new ways mechanically for games.
I'm going to interrupt you in just a second. Sorry.
Do it.
I meant to show my cat to say, subscribe to Crub on Patreon. I'll post more pictures of my cat for you, baby.
God.
All right, go on, Sean.
God. Anyway. God, the thought's gone. No, I remember. I gotta remember. Okay, so the mechanics, changing mechanics and whatnot. Like, for example, a lot of people want a Banjo 3, not a Banjo Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. And I know it was talked about last week on our last podcast. You can, not last week, whatever. Ukulele is one of those where it set out to be exactly what it was, a Nintendo 64 game on modern console. And a lot of people weren't really too into that. Because they're like, well, it feels very outdated, which it was. And I think that kind of goes into the argument that, hey, sometimes reboots are necessary when it comes to games. However, I do believe that there should still be a way to purchase old games.
Yeah.
Like, that needs to be there. Like, I am very happy that, for example, I can play Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's the first time I'm playing it. But I can also, if I so decide, I can play Final Fantasy VII on, like, the Switch, PlayStation, or what have you.
Yeah. Preservation is a whole different topic that M will be able to go on about forever. It should probably be its own topic. Well, we did it as a topic, I think, at one point.
We have.
Check out the podcast where we talked about preservation, if that was one that was on the official podcast and wasn't one that we did before we launched the podcast.
It was,
I don't remember.
Yeah. It had
can
the
talk about that for
3DS
actual
eShop
hours.
as the thumbnail, I believe.
Yeah. It's episode 2?
Yeah, we'll go with that. You'll find it.
Yeah.
You can look it up. It'll be in the show notes, most likely. Thanks, Chris.
Yes.
Well, now that we shut down Sean's entire thing that he was about to go on, let's talk about the MCU. No.
I will literally come to you. You know, I already told you what I'm going to do to you. You don't have a choice.
I was going to say, again, trying to give Sean time to figure out what he was going to say.
It's gone.
Preservation is important, just as important as the reboot cycle, I feel, because you can't just say this is the only version that you get anymore. Like, there should be a functional way to consume the other versions of that same property, because you never know when, like, for example, the new Mario movie had a lot of people thinking about how they actually really liked the really bad Mario movie. And how, like, if that wasn't available anymore, not that Nintendo acknowledges it, but imagine if that was wiped from the face of the earth the moment that the reboot was made.
They basically did. You can't find it anywhere. It was taken off of everything.
That's fair. You can find it if you want to look.
Legally, I don't think you can find it legally.
Crub does not
I'm
condone
legally
piracy.
advising you.
Crub does not.
In chat. Oh, God, I'm going to sneeze.
Go ahead, do
So,
it. Do it.
I
Bye.
kind of want to take this in a different direction that maybe is a little
Okay.
bit.
I'm ready.
I don't know. This could be
I'm ready.
a little bit flighty for us in this particular discussion, which is the value of doing this and whether it exists. So I would argue that the fleeting, ephemeral nature of things brings a unique value. That it stimulates personal growth, it inspires creativity, it reduces materialism. It fosters a deeper appreciation and mindfulness of our present circumstance. While, on the other hand, visiting similar experiences can bring comfort and familiarity. It leads to stagnation and diminishing returns as the thrill from that first encounter lessens over time, right? You're chasing the dragon. We may find ourselves clinging to the past and therefore missing out on entirely new experiences that could broaden our perspectives. And this repeated cycle may inadvertently feed into our consumerist culture, which emphasizes consumption over conservation. So thus, a balance is necessary wherein we acknowledge and embrace the transitory nature of life while consciously choosing novel experiences to nurture our growth and enrich our lives.
Yeah. I think the rock cycle comparison that I was trying to make, actually, the more that I think about it, like, a balance is needed to keep the ecosystem healthy. And what I was going to say to the first part of what you were saying was there's also a value in rebooting media, not necessarily in a profit-driving way or adapting media, in the sense that you don't learn how to draw without copying somebody else first. The very basis of education kind of starts, at least in America, by rote copying, and then you're taught to analyze, hopefully, and think about it to that second level. You don't just learn. You're told 2 + 2 is 4, and then you're told, okay, now think about why.
Why 2 + 2?
Yeah,
Why?
Then you think about derivatives and everything's derivative. Hey,
Critical
Perhaps you
thinking.
get on media, you don't make a movie if you've never seen one, right?
Yeah.
You don't make
That
YouTube
won't stop me.
videos.
God.
You don't make YouTube videos without having watched YouTube. You don't make music without having heard music. These are things where we're learning by copying. And the worst examples in our world of leaders in these spaces have been people who don't do it, like Susan W. from YouTube, who never once made a YouTube video in her entire goddamn life. And so she was the worst CEO you could have in a tech space. These things happen where people don't create them, and therefore they're not very good at handling how to create them. If you're going to make a video game, you should know how to play video games, right? Like, I think that's a pretty generic statement to say. I don't think, to cut it off, because I can already hear the argument being made, I don't think that you have to be good
That's
at
the
games.
argument.
You don't have to be good at these games in order to be able to make them. You don't have to be good at games in order to be like, what's his name? The Dean Takashi, right? The guy who cannot play video games and he's a critic. He can't. He's the guy who did the Cuphead, the Cuphead jump thing, right? Like, he got a hell of a lot of flack for that, which, I understand why people look at that and go, you should be capable of playing games to be a critic. But I don't think you have to be good at it.
In the same breath, the context of that one's also important. I know we've talked about that before, but for those that may not be familiar, Dean Takahashi is a journalist / game journalist, because there's sometimes a difference in terms of who gets those jobs. And he posted a video of, here's 15 minutes of me failing the basic tutorial of Cuphead because I was just distracted talking to the developers about the process, and so I wasn't even paying attention to what I'm doing. Look at how stupid I am, And now he is roasted forever because of something that he was showing off because it's funny, because the way that our brains sometimes work is that we do dumb things. I've gotten flack in my videos for single frames where I leave something sitting because I left it there, or God forbid I stopped for a moment in my never-ending game recording session to take a note, to do my job. Like it's there's such a microscope on everything involved in any form of media nowadays that, you know,
Oh yeah.
people want perfection, and it's just unattainable. But that's not really the topic at hand here. Just
No,
to
but
defend,
I
to
did
defend
wanna-
Takahashi a little bit for that one.
To defend that whole thing, to stop that argument, because I could see it happening.
Sure, yeah,
I
yeah.
can see how that argument could be immediately made based off of what I was saying. Where,
Yeah.
yes, you do need to play games to make games, and you do need to eat food in order to become a good chef, right? Like, you have to do these things. So copying is an inherent part of perfection, and I think that that's perfectly acceptable to a certain point. I don't know where I stand with reboots and remasters, and I think that a lot of it tends to be that it depends on how good it is as a standalone piece of art, right? I'm not going to go watch the latest whatever just because it's a thing, which is part of that MCUification where, oh, you have to because it's part of this, right? I don't want that. That's not what I'm looking for in an experience. I'm not going to watch this just because it's the newest MCU movie, right? It also needs to be good. And if it's not, then I don't see why I would want to watch it. And that's part of like what I don't like about that experience, right? I can't watch the good MCU film that just came out because there's 12 bad MCU films that I don't want to watch that I have to watch in order to get
Yeah,
to it.
that's a whole other.
What do you mean you
Yeah.
didn't watch all of WandaVision? Now you're not gonna get the movie, bro.
And
God.
so Trav and Sean, I want to rope you guys into
Yes.
this part of the discussion.
I have something I want to say, but it's a total tonal shift, so just
All right, so
want
Sean
to throw
goes,
that out there.
Sean goes first. What I want to say is to further head off people trying to argue with M in the comments or the reviews. Leave a review, but only if it's nice. I think it's also important to say that the exception would prove the rule. I'm sure there is a game that was made by someone who didn't make games, and it was good. Sure, but they probably had to play that game to have done it. You know, and also, obviously, the first games were made by people who didn't play games because they just ripped off real games. So
Right, they
Yeah.
were all sports
Yeah.
games. They
Yeah.
were all sports games. It was tennis, it was tic-tac-toe. Like, these were the first games.
yeah. So Sean, what are your thoughts
Yes.
on this forked topic, this adaptation of the topic at hand?
So, I do agree that copying is very big when it comes to, you know, creating your own thing. Like I'm a musician, I can pinpoint guitarists that I take a lot of inspiration from, that I do a lot of similar styles to, drumming. And
You're about
currently,
to get sued by Pharrell.
God. But also, you guys were talking about, you know, to make a YouTube video and whatnot. I'm currently making a video game, and I'm going through a lot of like videos and looking into seeing thematically things that I want to do, how to convey certain things to players, and I'm getting a lot of inspiration from certain developers who I guess you could say I'm kind of copying from, but at the same time, it's inspiring me and helping me learn the steps to take next. And a thing that someone told me this many years ago that I stick to this day is that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent, because the more you do it, the more you're going to remember how to do it, the more you're going to be able to build off of that. And I think what it comes down to is if you stay away from certain things, you're just not expanding your horizons in whatever kind of creativity that you're trying to do. You need to continue to open your eyes and see what's around you. And with that said, Trav, what thing were you going to yell earlier?
No, I'm. If you have more to say on that point, that's okay. I was gonna
No.
basically change the topic real quick.
No,
Because it was
really.
something that came to my mind when we were talking about like the financial side of it. Like, is it viable to keep doing these reboots? And a recent example came to mind, which isn't even out yet, is they're remaking Metal Gear Solid 3
Mhm.
while also re-releasing it as part of a bundle, the original, on modern platforms.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about like how like, oh well, I still want to play the original, where does that lie for you? Is that good enough to have a separate package but currently available in a practical way for modern platforms? Like, is that a good solution for you guys, or is that too stingy? Might not be the right word. Commodified, I guess.
I think that's, I mean, it's going to be a nuanced topic no matter what, but in my opinion, I think that's the right way to go, but it opens the can of worms of people just arguing back and forth about which one is better.
Yeah.
And
which is a definitive version.
Yeah.
Is it the original version that came out, or is it the new one that's...
And then how come they're not re-releasing the original version? Because I wanted the re-release of this one, which is like version 1.6.
And why the fuck isn't Hideo Kojima on this one? And you start to,
like
go
people
with all that.
people would point out like, oh, you can buy Resident Evil 4, the original version on PS5 for $4. Or you can spend $70 on, or I think it was $60 because it was
That's a great example.
on the remake, which is functionally the same game but prettier with a couple small changes. But the thing is, the remake is, at that point, if you are worried that much about the cost of it, it's not for you. It's for the people that want to experience it again with fresh eyes, that want to experience a slightly different perspective. Or
Boy,
for people,
that is the biggest piece out of all of this, by the way. When we're talking about some of this media just isn't for you. That is the one thing, and I know it sucks. I know it sucks to be a Star Wars fan and look at these Star Wars films and go, wow, I don't want any of them. They're not for you.
Em and I have talked about Star Wars many a time, and my end result is that I sort of turned my brain off to Star Wars, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I've always seen it as schlock. I've always seen it as good campy movie, and I know that you grew up more so on. I grew up on the prequels as well. Don't get me wrong, but I grew up on the prequels in an era. I'm sorry, you grew up on the original trilogy. I grew up on the original trilogy in an era where the prequels also existed. Like you're a little older, because you're like 90, and so.
God.
Wow. Jeez.
No one actually knows M's true age. He's immortal. That is.
Yeah.
I've never said my age to anybody.
Yeah.
But
No.
okay.
Not a single person has ever known his age. So I'm saying 90, and it'll be 400 next time.
So
Fun
Star
fact.
Wars,
wait, no, real quick. I need you to know this. M doesn't even know his age.
Somehow M
I
returned.
forget it often.
But yeah, like we've talked about Star Wars a bunch, and I know that you have, at points, had that opinion of Star Wars where you're like, man, I keep giving it a shot, and I just keep getting disappointed, and I'm like, yeah, I don't even pay attention to it anymore. Like if I want to watch it, I will, and it is what it is.
That's kind of the whole thing with everything Disney at this point, though, for me, right? Like everything Disney, I have just accepted that it's not meant for me. It's for people who
and that's fine.
Like bad writing, and that's fine.
Yeah. Trav, what were you gonna say?
Fuck you, first off. No, but like I agree for the most part. Most of Star Wars is trash.
Jesus Christ.
And like even the like, dude, have you seen episode 1? Luke got hair, bowl cut, bitch. No, I'm just trying to ruffle feathers.
Episode 1 has Watto, so you're wrong.
Oh, I meant episode 4. I meant episode 4.
That's how much of a fan he is.
Yeah, no, I'm a really casual Star Wars fan that has seen a lot of it. I don't retain a lot of it.
Did you know?
Because it's a lot of just bullshit. Anyway, no, I want to get my point across real quick.
Yeah.
One thing that helps me enjoy Star Wars is it's almost become the same way I look at the MCU, which is a statement on itself, which is I am looking at Star Wars as a platform for people to tell stories, not a universe for people to add to. And that's kind of just how that's almost always how I've looked at Star Wars specifically, and why I don't really care about the canon and all that, which I know that's not what has an issue with. I doubt that he really cares, like, well, how does episode 5 of Andor connect to Anakin Skywalker? That's not what I'm trying to say. No, I
just think they're very badly written. That's it.
Yeah, no, I agree. But also, like, just trying to look at everything as its own stories, for the most part, has helped my enjoyment. Like, I don't think I'd enjoy Mandalorian as much. Like, looking at it as its own thing, I think was pretty good up until the last season. And then, just in general, tying it back to the MCU, like, I'm almost looking at everything as its own thing that will build off of, previous stories. But trying to judge them as their own thing, I think for the most part, is a fair way of looking at it. I'm not going to say that they're still good and that it makes it enjoyable for the MCU, because I'm a shill, and I am incapable of looking at that in an unbiased way. But with Star Wars, it's a medium on its own at this point. like, sure, there's an episode of, what was it? Was it Book of Boba Fett or Mando? Where there's, like, Jack Black is the king of this planet. Like, fuck it, that's fun. Whatever. I don't
Especially
care
because they
anymore.
grew up as fans of that. Like, imagine being
Yeah.
Jack Black and
Like,
being able to be
that's
in
gotta be
Star Wars. Whether
so
it's
much
good or
fun.
not, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
you were in Star Wars. They can't take that away from you. You know?
And then there's Gus Fring telling me, like, die. Cool. Awesome.
Hot. I want that.
What was it?
Maybe.
The dark saber you wanted, or was that someone else?
Yeah, which was also, by the way, a long-term adaptation story of something that what's his name, the Star Wars lead guy now, that he was writing in Clone Wars. So like that's one of the few like super long-running threads that they've had. And to go to Clone Wars, Clone Wars is one of those where, like everything else in a Star Wars, like you kind of said, there are things that come about in these different pieces of media that you wouldn't watch if it weren't for the property. The brand does matter. You wouldn't watch Clone Wars if it wasn't Star Wars. You might not watch it if it was, but it's actually pretty good.
I would never watch and enjoy a movie like Joker if it wasn't based off of that character.
Can we make Joker but without Joker? Can we just make it like...
Yeah.
Oh,
That's just Taxi or whatever.
that's true.
Taxi driver.
Yeah,
Taxi.
that's true.
Crazy
I thought it was
Taxi.
Okay.
To get back onto it a little bit. All right. I feel like maybe the one thing that we haven't really discussed is my take, which is about how some of these things are just meant to be ephemeral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can agree with that.
Do we need another Star Wars movie? Right? Do we need that? Or is the experience, the memory that you have, worth it?
Yeah. No, I think that in a case like a Star Wars, there is magic to having everyone be able to experience a Star Wars in theaters for the first time. Like, you'll never have that experience with just re-airing one in theaters. So I think there's value to stuff like that. But there's also something interesting, like in the case of a Zelda. Zelda used to be, and now kind of is again, an event every time it came out. And then if you look from the moment that Zelda 1 came out until 2011, before Skyward Sword, there were as many releases in the Zelda franchise, as 2011 to 2016. From years 25 to 30 of Zelda, there were as many releases as there were in the entire previous 25 years. Because they remastered or remade every single one on some platform. They made Triforce Heroes, they made a sequel to Link to the Past, which in Japan is called Link to the Past 2, or Triforce of the Gods 2, excuse me. There were just so many countless re-releases and sequels and Hyrule Warriors games, which I will count.
As you should.
Because I was counting the CDI games in that list, too. I did this at one point because I was fascinated by how commercialized Zelda had become finally after being this mythical series. And that's what, to go back to Final Fantasy 16, is fascinating. When you think about Final Fantasy 16 is only we had 10 in 2001. And in the following 22 years, we've only had 5 more in terms of main series Final Fantasy. And that's fascinating to think about, because obviously there are spin-offs and sub-sequels and 4513 games. And same happened...
That's a Kingdom Hearts name.
Yeah, and it actually is. And the same happened to Zelda, where there were a bunch of spin-offs. But it's interesting that to me, I think Final Fantasy is one of the few left where when there's a numbered Final Fantasy, it feels kind of like a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those things where if that didn't happen anymore, if we stopped adapting Final Fantasy, I think there'd be something that'd be lost. I don't know.
I can agree with that. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Sure. At the same time, and I think maybe this is my my crotchety old 90-year-old body who's saying this, but
91 now. Happy birthday.
91-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
I think
He ages fast.
He moves at interstellar time. That one.
God.
Keep going. Sorry.
So all right, I'm going to get a little flighty again. But I think that as we acknowledge the ephemeral essence of life, it mirrors our adaptability to the ceaseless dance of change, right? Infusing our lives with a spectrum of fresh experiences and prospects and wisdom, and this cognizance of the fleeting nature of existence amplifies our value perception. It kindles a sense of mindfulness and gratitude and deepened involvement in the now. And through these transient moments, we're nudged from our comfort zones, spurring a personal evolution of fortitude, of adaptability, and arming us to counter challenges and transformations. A focus on ephemerality softens our inclination towards materialism. It redirects our attention from the perishable physical to the lasting realms of experiences and connections and self-improvement. And amidst all of this constant flux, each passing moment brims with possibilities for creativity and innovation and urges us to perpetually craft anew and adopt fresh lenses to view the world. And this delicate balance invites us to celebrate life's nature while consciously opting for novel experiences. Boy, I just...
So
You just went for it.
now I'm looking at your faces. That's the thing, right?
I found
My
that
I don't
dog
think
went
you're
and came and
wrong.
said hi.
I found that very shallow and pedantic.
Thank you.
No, it's honestly well said though.
Perhaps. Oh yeah.
Here I am
But-
being a pedant.
Oh yes, sorry, pedantic. You're right.
God,
Pedantic.
We didn't make that a
Hey.
thing yet.
we shouldn't.
I don't think you're wrong. I'm just like, all right.
You said
Can
big
I have the
word.
soapbox now? I want to say something.
Do it.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
I don't have anything to say actually.
You've
That was just a metaphor for adaptations.
For the
me saying, I
ephemeral-
want to do this thing.
The ephemeral
I-
nature of Trav's thoughts.
yeah, but I do agree with
The
that a
only
lot because
ephemera in
Oh.
my brain is like a
I'll
tumor.
break your ephemeras.
Oh,
Good, do
fucking
it.
finally. Put me in the femur breaker right now, baby.
do it. But no, I do completely agree with that because like there are certain things that like the more you look back on, it's better to have them stay there rather than them to keep being brought up. Which is why like nostalgia I think is such a big deal to me because there are certain things that I know I just will never go back to because I want it to remain a good part of my life, and if it comes back, it might not have the same feeling to it. And also I kind of enjoy the feeling of that longing for that, if that makes any sense. Like I kind of enjoy feeling like, I miss those days. Like I like going in that mode because it helps me write, it helps me create, it helps me code, it helps me, play guitar for crying out loud because I'm like, I remember I really liked that, and I don't listen to it again because I'm like, no, I'm just gonna play what I think I remember, which isn't always the best idea. But it really is interesting to like, I don't know, I haven't really thought about that too much until right this second, and also my dog's going buck
Are
wild.
you gonna play Smoke on the Water for the 5th time?
I will not. I hate playing
Play
that
it
song,
really
actually.
poorly. Like play it absurdly. Like don't even get it like in
Bump,
rhythm.
Bump,
God,
bump, bump, bump.
I think I
But-
just don't want another shallow film that's just a retreading of the same thing that I've already watched 12 times every year.
You're right.
For the
I
rest
don't
of
want
my life.
Dune. Fuck Dune.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know how to respond to that.
personally speaking, I agree with you. And in the same
Mhm.
breath, we did hit on that point that it's also okay if it's not for us. You know,
Right,
if-
that's the thing. It's just
Yeah.
not for me.
yeah, like
Mhm.
a modernized.
As long as we still have
retelling-
plenty of creativity and new stuff coming along, I'm fine.
And
And the
we're in a-
moment that we get into that Disney owns everything, right? Like, and all they do is just, hey, we're going to rehash 2020 again this year. Like, I don't want that.
And,
I'm gonna
and-
keep it
as long as we're not
100
there.
with you. If I start looking at media, and this is a statement about me, I'm not trying to say anything about the industry with this, even though you could argue that I am. If I have to start looking at new things that come out and say like, oh well, this did it, like this older adaptation did it better, or etc., I'm gonna start getting really fucking bored.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Which
say,
yeah, could
Go
be a good commentary of the state of things, but also a state of, I don't think I want to criticize it. I want to look at the positives.
that too. I was going to say on the creativity front, one of the positives actually is that we are in a golden age of creativity for media in
Yeah.
general. It's been the longest running golden age because,
Thank
we
you,
have
Spider-Verse.
we have
God.
such a wide array of writers and directors and artists of any sort, and it's now easier than ever to start finding your way into these fields. Case
It
in
is
point,
pretty-
what we're doing.
yeah,
This is
mock
radio.
tests.
We're doing radio, but better. I'll say
Can
it.
I do a radio voice?
Do a radio
ahead.
voice.
Hey, hey, hey! Nope, that's the Chicken Man.
Yeah, I didn't like any of that. You know what? I'm sending you.
cheese?
I'm sending you to Brazil. You don't have a choice. But on that note, I want to ask before we close out the the little session. Does anyone else want to add anything before we go ahead and close it out? Because I think this is a good.
We're gonna do this
Go ahead.
episode again next week.
Yeah, the same exact thing. The only
We're
difference.
adapting it!
The only difference is Chris is going to be here instead of me, and he's going to have blue hair.
Trav, do the pog point. Do the point.
Oh, wait. Hold on. Let me get into position.
I apologize for those listening to the stream, listening to the audio version of this podcast. I'm making Trav point doing the stupid meme Wojak face because most of us have done this at some point now, and I don't like that we have, but he's doing it, and we're going to adapt
Giving
this
you different
into
versions.
we're going to adapt this into something terrible that will be posted on Twitter at some point soon, I'm sure.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm into that.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add. I think we've had a good talk here. This was a good podcast. What a good
Moriarty?
job, us.
I don't want to put the audience to sleep. I wouldn't want them to zone out from what I'm saying. So I think I'm okay.
They're not going to zone out, and if they do, I'll stab them.
I would not want to cause them to zone out listening to me.
Trav is still just doing those different emotes.
I'm giving you
God.
50 different versions.
Well, on that note, I want to say thank you all so much for hanging out with us. I appreciate every single one of you. You're great. You're wonderful. And if you disagree, I will come fight you. But anyway,
Okay.
Moriarty, where can they find you?
Where can they
Not
fight you?
Where can they fight
It's
me?
on site.
Yeah, where can they fight you?
The reason I actually don't tell anything about myself.
God.
You can find me at youtube.com/reallycool.
All right. Kevin, what about you? Where can they find you? And then, I'm not doing the fight bit anymore. I'm done with that. It's boring.
You can
Why
fight
are you so boring?
You can fight me at the time that you're watching this very day at Charity vs. Room 2, New Age of Zeros, a charity event that we're doing over at the Charity Room, live on Twitch, Friday through Sunday, July 28th through the 30th, August 4th through the 6th. We're doing a bunch of games head-to-head. I'm going to fight Trav for real at some point. We're doing
I will
such
be there.
hit races in games such as Trav versus known Metroid fans. Some call him Jonathan in Metroid Dread, a rematch from last year's Charity vs. Room. We're doing other hit games like Solitaire and more. Our schedule is available at the Charity Room on Twitter and potentially in the show notes and description of this podcast as well. You should tune in. Like half of the Crub crew is there at some point throughout the 2 weeks, so it'll be a lot of fun. I'm not going to plug myself this week because I have nothing to plug other than the Charity Room. We're raising money for a great cause. Do it. Give us money. Patreon.com/Crub. That's not the cause, but do it.
God. Trav, you say things.
You can find me at youtube.com/thattravguy because I will be returning to Doom with Final Doom in next week. I will also be part of the Charity vs. Room event. I will be racing Some Call Me Johnny. I will be playing Overcooked 2. I will be playing something else that I can't remember off the top of my
Punch-Out
head.
versus
That's okay.
Salty DK
Punch
Dan.
Out versus Salty DK Dan. That'll be very exciting. I have raced Elliot in Punch Out, and I didn't realize that he was so bad at the game, and it was really embarrassing. So I hope this time it's a challenge.
Damn.
You can also find me on Twitter at @TheOtherTravGuy because that Trav guy was taken. Sean, where can we find you?
That's me. I will not be at the Charity Room, but I will be in the chat because it's a very good cause and you should be there. And if you're not there, I will be very upset with you. You better. Anyway, but you can find me at WolfKOSan on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Zippers also wants to say hi to me.
You want to say hi to Zippers?
Yeah, come on. I want Zippers to be the last person we talk to because honestly, Zippers is better than all of us.
Trav's cat is now back
Come
in
on.
frame.
Come on, say hi. Say hi.
Meow.
Come on, do it.
Say a meow.
Meow.